Thank you, Ed and Gary, one more time. Join me in welcoming Joel Bauman, Ben Carr, Jonathan Dambrot, and Tim McKnight. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Good to be here. So, as a former CISO and a operator at a VC, CISOs want to be more strategic all the time. But I'll be honest with you, they're never that strategic. They don't have enough time to do it. So they highly rely on folks like the guys to my left here, companies that we've invested in, people we've invested in, who are real innovators and founders. So, we also rely on AT&T research and innovation, our innovation teams within our companies as well, to sort of pull us out of that foxhole to talk about what's on Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3. So I'd like these guys to introduce themselves, their companies, in a minute or two each, and then we'll get into some questions. How's that?
Hey, everyone. AT&T, thanks for having us. Appreciate it. I'm Joel Bauman. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Synqly. My guess is none of you have heard of it, but at some point you will, hopefully. So at Synqly, we're solving one very, very common problem in security. If the average enterprise buys about 75 different products in security, and I think that number is actually increasing pretty rapidly, they need to fundamentally work together. And security, implementers, CISOs, directors of security go to vendors and say, well, you need these things to connect. And the challenge with that is, if I'm a vendor, I then have to go find an engineer, I've got to go build it, and I don't have to do it once, I've got to do it for the 10,000 security products out there. And so at Synqly, what we've done is we've built an integration platform specifically for security and IT ops vendors. So if you're a practitioner, you see lots of value, but I'm not actually selling you anything. If you're a vendor, though, we fundamentally dropped the cost of having to go build the dozens of integrations you need by 90+%. And then we help with maintenance and support so you don't have to continue to do it.
Yeah, my name's Ben Carr, and I am the Chief Security and Trust Officer with a company called Halcyon. Thank you, AT&T, for having us here today. What we do is really solve one of the largest risks in cyber, right? For many companies, cyber is one of the top 3 risks, if not the top risk. And when you break down cyber and look at risks in cyber, ransomware is one of the top, if not the top risk for many organizations in the cyberspace. So what we do is we make a platform that actually addresses that risk specifically, either prevents, or in the case of, if for some reason we can't prevent it, creates that resiliency factor, being able to recover the keys and prevent the exfiltration of data. But first and foremost, we're out there to try to prevent the actual exploitation of ransomware on endpoints and stop, all the things that we see in the news on a weekly basis.
Hi, everybody. Jonathan Dambrot. I'm the CEO of Cranium. Also, thank you to AT&T and Rich and team for having me here. Cranium is a company focused on AI operational governance. And the way we think about that is, a lot of conversations around AI revolve around all the really interesting things that it's bringing to the table. What we found is that, a lot of this is getting held up in large enterprise organizations because there's not good visibility. People have a really hard time understanding whether or not the AI has security in place, whether it's compliant, and whether the third parties that are bringing these in really can also meet the standards of the organizations that are looking to use these at scale. And so we see this as the biggest issue. We actually spun this out of one of the big 4 last year. So this has been a really exciting opportunity for us to really look at how do we help organizations go faster with their AI by bringing that layer of security, compliance, and third-party risk.
Thank you all. So, Joel, the last 10 years have seen just a boom of cybersecurity products and companies. And certainly CISOs having a big appetite of buying those products. Do you see this trend continuing, or do you expect it to consolidate over time in the coming years?
Well, I think with investors like you folks, it's almost gotta continue because there's a lot of money going into this space right now. But slightly more seriously, we see that trend continuing over and over, and you see guys like Jonathan, guys like Ben, who have to go create that next new product because the threat landscape never actually really consolidates. The challenge, though, that I see, and I think with a lot of CISOs, what they're saying is, well, if I've got to then go run 75, 80, 100 different products in security, and I've got IT ops products and other products, how do I make use of them, right? And it's a technology, people, and process question. And so from a Synqly perspective, the technology you in most cases have to have. It's not really a can I live without it? Well, can I live with having ransomware hit?
Yeah.
Well, probably not. But fundamentally, if I've got to have the technology, I can't hire possibly enough people to make it all work. So we need then that process. And part of it's integrations, part of it's being able to build internal process. But that last piece, I think, needs a lot more focus here as we can move into the back half of this decade.
It's very optimistic. What do you got? What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, look, I think the challenge with cyber and security in general is that we're always struggling to kind of keep pace with the threat actors, right? They're evolving and changing. And so, it used to be we just installed AV. I remember back in the days, I worked down here in Dallas, way back, Texas Commerce back, and running around at a sneaker net, right, trying to solve AV problems, right, by updating systems or patching things. But we moved into EDR, we moved into XDR. Like there's always a gap, right? Many people think, okay, I have EDR, it's protecting the problem, but we see myriad number of companies actually still getting exploited, and so there's just gaps as the threat actor moves along, and they outpace technologies we have. So we need things like Halcyon, right, to address those specific verticals. And I think that problem becomes this emergence of this repetitive innovation cycle. Companies like us are out there to try to solve. That's why we see the number of companies. I mean, the industry is ever evolving and changing, but I think it's driven by the threat actor side, really.
Yeah, and I joke a little bit, but I certainly agree that most CISOs are looking to drive towards as much of a common platform as they can. Of course, their CFOs are looking to drive out cost and find economies of scale as well. Jonathan?
I mean, look, right now, if you think about every conversation I go into right now around cyber is focused on how do we think about AI, either the use of AI or how to protect AI. And so when we look forward, I think everybody's sort of on a different part of this journey, right? So I know all of us probably use some form of AI either daily or as part of our efforts. But really what we see now is how do we think about where we are today. Some people have been using machine learning and AI for a long time. Some are really thinking about actually building products and supporting their services. And so you have this wide spectrum. So for us, it's really how do we address and how do we help people along that journey so that they can make the right decisions to get to scale.
So a question probably for all three of you, and thank you for that, is what advice would you give other security software vendors, startups who want to increase their enterprise customers going forward? Besides learning how to deal with procurement, what's your thoughts?
Well, if that one is challenging, and it becomes ever more challenging in an environment like this. But fundamentally, at least from my perspective, really when I go work with a customer, when I was selling into enterprise in some of my former companies, right, there's a partnership. And there's a partnership between the vendor or the vendors they're buying and the actual company. Yeah. And the challenge with that partnership is there's also a bit of a mismatch. So when I go in, I was getting things like, well, here's my entire enterprise architecture. These are the 20 things that I need you to integrate to. And then I need support for all of those things. And by the way, we're probably going to change this out for this, which means I'm going to need integration into this. And then I go talk to the engineering team at my company, and the engineering team at my company would either laugh me out the door or say, this is fantastic, but here are the core things I've got to go build for my product. And so there's a mismatch or kind of competing priorities for what actually then gets done. And that's to some extent why we built Synqly, is if I can go integrate to a single platform and then connect all those things to do something similar with a single set of APIs, a single SDK, I can, again, drop a giant amount of the expense out of that. So I can then go back to enterprise and say, well, look, here's my solution, and I work with everything, and I can actually maintain that.
Yes, I mean, you guys are dealing with your customers today. You're all three at different stages as startups, and what are your experiences? What do you think could be better in dealing with selling into the enterprise or selling into the CISO in general? So.
Look, for us, I think the incentives are starting to align a little differently, right? So, people are really looking to use AI. One of our biggest areas of growth has been around this third-party question, and it came up earlier in some of the discussions. And what we find historically, I ran a company prior to this that was one of the leaders in third-party risk management and threat intelligence, right? And the problem has always been like getting vendors to participate and getting them to provide responses to things like questionnaires and standards. I think the SIG was mentioned on one of the first panels, and I chaired that committee for a couple of years, right? So it's just hard. What we're finding is that because people are trying to drive automation at a scale and get an understanding of that, they want the ability to actually unlock the power of AI, but they don't know how to do that. So for us, the incentive today is for the technology provider that's trying to integrate AI into their products and then sell them to large enterprise. That is a massive investment today. And for the large enterprise, when you think about every CEO out there is talking about their AI strategy. So today I find that we're seeing things start to get into more alignment where the technology provider, so as a use case, we work with the largest bank in the world to really think about this with their vendors, being able to provide that information in, but do it in an automated way so that they can get that visibility into their AI bill of material, into the vulnerabilities, being able to provide that information on an ongoing basis so we don't have to think about that same problem that we've dealt with historically. So I think it's going to make it a lot easier, but we're still at the beginning.
Yeah, for me, it's really, you guys talked about it a little bit. I think it's about listening, right? I think security vendors have done a poor job in some cases of producing products that they think the industry wants, as opposed to actually talking, listening, spending time with CISOs to find out how they actually want to use product and what they need to do their job. There's so much opportunity and money, quite honestly, out there. The amount of startups coming out of Israel, the amount of startups here in the U.S., just focused on just the security market, is immense. And so, sitting in the seat, having been a multi-time CISO, one of my biggest problems was, how do I get insight into what technologies are actually things that are going to move the bubble for me when I run my program? How do I get the right insight to the next thing I actually need to invest and spend time in, because it is about people and process, really, at the end of the day. The tech is easy, right? It's about focus, and I think one of the things that vendors haven't done a great job of is actually addressing those things that really change the bubble, and that's where we're focused on, is really looking at, again, one of those top risks that's out there in the industry right now and trying to solve that unique thing. And then as CISOs, I think, or as security program owners, we need to look at that and figure out, okay, I need to cut through the fluff, and I need to focus on those things that are going to actually create change, create impact, and actually create value for the company at the boardroom.
Thanks, Ben. So, Jonathan, AI, that's your life. That's what you do. We haven't heard about that at all today. All right, good. Sarcasm still works. I'm curious, because, honestly, it's either security in the boardroom or AI or both at this moment.
Security of AI in the boardroom.
Yeah, exactly. So what are you seeing in engaging with your customers, from a CISO perspective? What are some of the challenges in getting up and running and governing and putting in place a program that you're living and breathing today?
I think the biggest challenge so far, let's just call it over the last 2 years, has just been a lot of confusion around even the definitions, right? So the last year and a half has been a lot of how do we really understand what AI means to our organization? How do we actually put policies and things in place that align around what the business needs to do in order to use these types of technologies? And so a lot of organizations have really large ML platforms that they built over a decade. But then the introduction of Gen AI has fundamentally changed the way that people really think about, introducing AI into these equations, both internally as well as through their third parties. So for us, as we think about, these, pieces, that's really why we think about the operational piece. CISOs today, every CISO I talk to has been, I don't understand how to operate this. How do I get there? And how do I make sure I can scale the operation that we now know we need to get to? And in some cases, they may not know where AI is integrated. Across some of our customers, these are tens of thousands of repos where AI is being integrated into these products, and I need to understand what that looks like. I need to understand what's out there. What are the risks associated with this? And then tell me how to fix that, right? But the first question is, what does this mean to me? How do I understand it? And then how do I operationalize this to really get it to scale?
That's great. Do you guys have any thoughts or comments? Are you bumping into AI at Synqly and Halcyon?
Well, so I don't bump into it the way Jonathan does, although ultimately we're probably going to need his technology because we do use it, and I think almost every vendor in some form or fashion does actually use it. Right? It's a brilliant tool.
Just be nice to your AIs. Right?
That's no fun.
Yeah. Well,
Gosh, now you're taking all the fun out of things. But no, I mean, we do use it. We view it as a tool to help accelerate everything from engineering to even to some extent working with customers, and we're starting to do some experimenting there. So it will be part of almost everybody's solution at some point, but we do have to actually secure it.
Yeah, and I think Gartner's also said that, right? So I think their expectation is in the next 18 months, AI applications will surpass standard SaaS and IT applications in the marketplace, right? So we're going to see this continued rapid introduction of AI basically across everything.
Yeah, it's almost exponential, right? I mean, that's really the challenge. I think a lot of people in the security industry look and focus on what the threat landscape looks like. But for me, a lot of it actually maps back to what your attack surface looks like. And this is just a much larger attack surface. And the challenge has always been what you don't know, right? And trying to protect that. And so I think as you look at the emergence of AI, the consumption of AI in your company, where's it being used? How's it being implemented? Where are the locations where you weren't even aware that that's attached to a business process? And so if you can't get out of that, in front of that very quickly, you're going to be overwhelmed, not by the threat actor, but by the attack surface that's just expanded to a point where you can't cover it anymore.
Yeah, and it may not be bad, right? We had an example where a customer had a software application that had gone through the standard software application cycle, got introduced, major application usage, and then an AI copilot got turned on in the application by the provider, and within a week, 5,000 people were using it. So it may not be bad, but understanding and getting a good understanding of what that threat and how to think about it was this challenge, and then being able to really articulate that across their application set.
You said, somebody pitched me the other day, said, there's going to be 20 of these who are going to be representing you as employees, the AI running around. And my mind goes right to minions, and they can be a little mischievous, those minions, Maybe they're not doing exactly the tasking you gave them to do. They might be doing something a little dangerous, per se. But so what's the future look like then with AI? What are your thoughts there? I mean, you're at the tip of the spear on this.
I think there are a couple of key areas that we're seeing. Our customers are starting to push us into really thinking about agents at scale, right? And it's not just single agents, it's really now multi-agent solutions where you kind of have a single agent that solves a problem, an agent that's really checking the work of that first agent, and then an orchestration agent, which is intended to have access to tools. So they're sort of standalone, pulling up the tools to solve the problem. They have access to data necessary to solve those. And I think these become incredibly powerful to really go after those things like you just mentioned. Like you have a task, you want somebody to support that, you want an agent to support it. But I do think that we risk, as an example, things like compliance challenges. So if you have a business in the EU and you have to understand whether or not it's going to meet those definitions for a restriction, and these are now pulling tools like sentiment analysis tools and data, you can very easily go across those lines. And so those are some of the things that I think agents at scale, we have some customers thinking about that at like 60,000, 80,000 agents. Those will be some areas where we'll have to really think about what that future, but really exciting. I mean, really, really impactful and exciting.
Awesome.
Well, and actually to build on that just a little bit, because there's AI and then there are all of the underpinnings you need for AI. And a lot of what I'm seeing with security companies, be it in attack surface and attack surface management or SOC automation or GRC or even identity, is you've got vendors that are starting to leverage AI to build basically applications on top of applications.
Right.
And so you end up with a base set of security tools which become ubiquitous across many, many, many enterprises. And then something's got to be done to be able to integrate what really amounts to disparate tools, because my guess is the tools for 5 of your companies didn't match, and the tools for your companies probably didn't match his. Yeah. So there's kind of it's almost a pyramid or piling of tools that you need to be able to sit underneath some of these AI applications. Yeah. You've got to basically build up that connection. So you've got to build basically a security mesh underneath it. And then you've got to be able to pull the data up so that you can run AI applications and make sure it's secure at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. And people used to say using AI to do coding is going to be the future. Like, we are here, right? If you look at the developers, like 80% of your developers are probably using AI on a daily basis to support their coding application. So it becomes, now what the future is like 6 months from now. It's not 2 years from now.
Awesome. So you said exciting a couple times. Let's talk about Ben. He's working in a pretty exciting space right now. And tell us a little bit about
exciting and scary.
Yeah, scary. I know. Well, that's exciting
and
too.
what seat you're sitting in. Yeah.
Roller coasters are exciting and scary, and so are ransomwares. So.
And I'll kind of come back to a little bit of what you said. Like, yes, so we think about AI, we think about the advances that are happening, and we're thinking about them from the positive side to the business, right? But the challenge becomes, what happens when you pivot to the threat actor side of that? Like, they are using and taking advantage of the same types of tools, sometimes the same tools that we are, right? And so in that kind of framework, you have to imagine these things getting ever faster. And so the change in ransomware, and I think the emergence and why it's been kind of so much of a concern for everyone, is the economy has changed in that side, and the motivation is monetary. It's not a malicious actor just trying to get access and corrupt something. It's not someone from a state actor side trying to get persistence and sit for a long time and wait around, and you have a long time to go through the investigation and find them. It's someone who's trying to get access to your system. There's a whole group of people called initial access brokers that just try to get access to systems, and then they sell that. And then they sell that to people whose job, they're very talented, who they come up with code designed to infect and create ransomware on a system, but those people aren't the same people that are executing that code. Then you have the threat actors that are actually, it's almost been democratized. It's anyone can do it, right? You don't have to really have experience. You go on the internet, you pay for access to a tool, you take advantage of that in another person's environment where they're hosting that, and you can launch attacks and try to get monetization without almost any experience. That's going to accelerate based upon the adoption of a lot of these technologies that we've seen used for good will just as well be used for evil. And so I think that we need to think about it in a different way. We don't have time for these longer term investigations and monitoring. We've got to think about the preventative side of it, and how do we get in front of this, and how do we use it at the same scale and at the same speed that threat actors are willing to do that.
Sounds like the bad actors actually have a pretty integrated system then, I guess. So
they do.
Something we can aspire to. So. But, well, listen, I know we've got a few minutes left for some questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
A couple come in. So as we've looked ahead, and we talked a lot about AI today, what is the next AI? What is the next thing that's going to fundamentally change how we operate and what we have to defend? No one wants to answer that one.
I mean, look, I think people talk about quantum, right? I think this is probably the area that everybody expects to be the next. I think there's the combination of quantum AI and to be determined technology advancements that I don't think we can imagine yet, right? I think you mentioned exponential scale.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that it goes so fast that the cycle times are probably going faster than our businesses can actually keep up in some areas, right? So you'll see these next emerging businesses, and that's kind of why we're here, right? Because when you think about those investments and the things that people need to look at, that money needs to come into companies that are going to be on the forefront of that. So I expect like the quantum investments probably coming, and continued AI investment.
Yeah, quantum's concerning for me, right? We invested in a lot of encryption technology, and people haven't reported on incidents because that data that was exfiltrated was encrypted, and so they're assuming it's not exposable. But then you introduce quantum, all that data that was now potentially exposed becomes, the cryptographic control around that didn't matter, right? And then on the AI side, I think it's the generative advances that we see in AI. So initially, it was a human spending all the time to generate an AI model. Then it moved to, kind of working with AI to generate that. And we're moving into the capacity for AI to generate its own AI, right? And once that starts happening, that exponential growth is going to accelerate faster than we can keep up with it. And so how do we put the right controls on it to ensure it's not getting away from us and it's not introducing issues or errors that we can't account or predict? I think we've seen some of that start to happen, but I think we need to look for how to make sure the control of the growth is aligned with our control to be able to accept it and understand it.
Yeah, and I think also the definition of AGI is one that I think is still out there. Like, when do we hit that? Is that still going to be achievable in a time frame? I would argue some people are probably trying to figure that piece.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'd actually go in a slightly different direction. I'm not an expert like you in AI by any stretch, but if I look at where we are on the adoption curve, I think we're still relatively early. So I'd look more at the democratization of AI, right? The next gen of people going through high school and college are actually going to get used to using it versus us who are all old and are just starting to try to figure it out.
Speak for yourself.
Okay, so I'm old, and these guys are joining me.
I'm just older.
But there are things that we haven't even started to think about from an AI perspective that the next gen's just going to come straight into because they've never not experienced it.
Yeah. But I think it's also, right now, there's, at least from a corporate mentality, it's human in the loop and everything. You kind of like your Tesla, right? Does anybody have one and put it on full autopilot? How comfortable? Are you 100% sure that thing can drive you from Jersey to California? Yeah, I wouldn't do it. But it's certainly the bad actors, when it's democratized, will certainly, consider letting it loose, right?
Yeah. So when you look at the llamas, people can build their own at home, right? I got to experience Super Cruise in a Chevy, which isn't quite the Elon thing, and then you got Neuralink, right? So those are all things that are on the horizon, and how's that going to change how we operate?
Agreed.
Yeah. So guys, thank you all very much. Appreciate y'all being here today.
Yeah,
a round of applause for our panelists.
Thanks. Thank you.